Hey guys, welcome back today. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the next two roles of government in a mixed economy. The one that talks about the redistribution of wealth and the one that talks about providing public goods and services for the citizens. Right? As a reminder, the role of government in our economy is very important. It does certain things and gets involved in certain ways that are a necessity. They try to stay out of it as much as they can, but there are times where they need to get involved. And we looked at one of those the other day when we read about some of the excerpts from the jungle and how the government had to get into the meatpacking industry to protect the consumer, really. All right, so what happens next is we're going to take a look at the next two roles of government. First one we're going to look at is provide public good and service. The second one we're going to look at is about the redistribution of income. Public goods and services are basically services that an individual, business, or person cannot or should not be providing. They deliver goods for all citizens. A couple different things there. Public good is something that individuals cannot be excluded from, and use by one individual does not diminish the use by others. Right? Those two characteristics really make up what public goods are. The characteristic of non-excludability and non-rivalrous. Non-excludability basically means that individuals cannot effectively be excluded from use. Non-rivalrous essentially means that use by one individual does not diminish use by another individual. Lighthouses are perfect examples here, right? You can't turn the lighthouse off for one person and keep it on for the rest. It's either on or it's off. There's no in between, right? And just because I use the lighthouse doesn't mean that the other boats in the harbor, the other ships on the ocean, wherever this lighthouse may be, also cannot use this lighthouse. We all can use this lighthouse, and it's not diminished if we use this lighthouse. The lighthouse will still be doing its essential function and still be doing the same thing that it's been doing. Two types of public goods that we need to think about. We need to think about pure public goods and impure public goods. All right, pure public goods meet both standards, the non-excludability and the non-rivalrous, whereas the impure meet one of the two standards. And sometimes, they may not meet any of the standards, and we may still consider them public goods, and that's just a little tricky, but we'll get there. One great example of a pure public good is national defense, because the Army is there to protect one person. The Army is also there to protect many people, because many people live near each other. They try to offer protection for one citizen in an area, others will likely be protected, and that's why this is such a great example of a public good, is that you cannot offer national security, national defense to just one person. If you do it for one person in every area of the country, chances are other people in those areas are also going to be protected. This meets the principle of both non-excludability and non-rivalrous, right? The diminishing return doesn't occur because, essentially, if they're protecting one person, they're probably also protecting me, and it's important to take that into consideration. Next, another great example is knowledge. Knowledge is available to you at all times, and there's no charge for it. You have the free option to learn. Believe it or not, you go out and learn, do whatever you want. Right? It's not limited to only a few. Everybody's capable of learning, becoming knowledgeable in something. It can be enjoyed by many. It can be enjoyed by all. Again, it meets one of those public goods, the pure public good of it, right? Something that I cannot exclude you from. You cannot be excluded from. If you want to gain knowledge, you have the right and the ability to gain knowledge in our country. And it's also not rivalrous. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you gain, you can always gain more, and the knowledge that you're gaining does not diminish from others' knowledge. So it's a kind of one of those good examples of a pure public good. Over-the-air public television is also a great example. All right, broadcast companies will exclude certain people, but for the most part, your ABCs, your Foxes, your NBCs, and your CBS are usually all free, plus your local PBS station. All right. It's broadcast by private companies to these citizens. So this is an example where the government does not deliver it, but a private company does. Cable TV, pay TV, is scrambled so that we cannot be free riders on their system. Now, I've heard there are ways around that, but I want to make it clear is that it's scrambled for a reason to discourage free riders. A free rider is a person who enjoys the public good but has not had to pay anything for it. Now, a great example would be to think about somebody from out of town may be enjoying your local highway. Well, they're paying for a highway that you can go enjoy in their town, so there's kind of this reciprocal benefit there. But when it comes to cable TV, is if I'm not paying for cable TV and I'm taking it from places, it becomes an issue, and I'm a definition of a free rider. Fireworks displays are another good example, and it's kind of mixed in between pure and impure, because I can see fireworks for miles around, miles and miles and miles. I can see fireworks, all right, and you can see it, especially if they're large fireworks. Now, what I can do as an entrepreneur is I can start making people pay for premium seats, so that they can be a part of it, but it's still really not that excludable. I can exclude the best seats, but it's still not excludable. So it still meets that demand of a public good. The highway system. The highway system doesn't really fit either one. We pay for highways through our taxes. So we are not free riders on it. And even if somebody's out of town visiting, they're paying for a highway that you're welcome to visit as well. It's really important that we take note of that. For the most part, highways are usually pretty good. They're a public good. They're non-excludable. You really can't exclude many things on highways. Now, we do have laws in place to protect people on the highway, but we don't exclude certain people from the highway based on other things. But we can kind of have it as non-rivalrous. There are times where it can be, but if we're in a traffic jam, it's definitely subject to use. And as you can see, there'd be too many cars in an area, and that area would have a jam of traffic. And what would happen is you would eventually have to kind of look for a different route to go, a different way to go. Now something is being over enjoyed by the public, and that's when it becomes kind of an impure public good. The park systems, these lands have been kind of designated for all, for enjoyment by all, again, paid for through taxes. So there's not a lot of free riders, but there could be free riders that work their way in that maybe are from a different area, something like that, and they're kind of visiting, maybe don't care as much for the park. All right, but these also can become overcrowded, and they can become rivalrous because maybe the best spot on the beach is taken, maybe the best picnic booth is taken, maybe there's too many people at the park and it's overcrowded. So we kind of have to kind of look at that as an example as well. When we talk about redistributing the income, and we talk about that, is we're talking about basically taking the government and redistributing from wealthy businesses and citizens to the less wealthy businesses and citizens. Two ways we do that are through taxes and subsidies. Again, food assistance programs and tax returns are two ways to do it. We have three different types of tax policies, never mind my typo there. But we have three different types of tax policies: a progressive, a regressive, and a proportional. Proportional also is known as flat, which would be the fourth type if we really wanted to, but I didn't want to dive that into it and distinguish really between a flat and proportional when they're very, very close to the same thing. A progressive tax is a tax rate that gets higher when your income gets higher. That's currently what we see basically in the United States. We're broken into tiers of tax-paying citizens, and what happens is as you earn more, you have to pay more. So that's why you tend to see, some of the wealthier people in the United States that complain about taxes the most is because they are paying more for them. That's a progressive tax. So those that have more pay more, those that have less pay less. That's kind of the idea behind a progressive tax. And we see that for our United States income tax. A regressive tax is a tax rate that gets lower when income gets higher. Highly unpopular with the majority of Americans, because what we see is if I get richer, I pay less in taxes and the poor pay more in taxes. And what would happen is people would become kind of disenfranchised and upset about it. And we'd likely see a revolution again to overthrow the government that put this into place. Now, there's not a lot of places that use this. And all the research that I've done on it, I really cannot find a perfect example of a regressive tax because it would be so unpopular. But many economists would argue that it's used on our vice or sin taxes, our cigarettes and alcohol taxes, because, proportionally, when we talk about the proportion of money that we're allocating to these certain things, right, it tends to be higher for lower classes than it does for upper classes. So what you would see many economists make the argument that these consumption taxes on cigarette and alcohol are actually a regressive tax that influences and affects the lower classes more than the upper class. The last type of tax that we're going to look at is a proportional tax, and this is a tax rate that's constant regardless of your taxable base. So a flat fee, say 7%, or say 3.4%. So Indiana and Illinois both use a flat tax or a proportional tax to the rate that you pay for your income tax, and then it varies by county. In Indiana, for sure. So a tax rate that is constant regardless of your tax base. All payers are expected to pay the same amount. Now, where the difference between flat and proportional comes in is a flat would be all payers are expected to pay the same amount based on this number. We give you a solid number that you have to pay. Now, a proportional tax, on the other hand, is all payers are expected the same percentage of an amount, and that's a lot more common. So Indiana's state tax system definitely uses a proportional tax. That's one area where you'd see it. When we talk about subsidies, we're talking about a form of support aimed to help a corporation or individual with trying to basically promote economic and social activity, whether that can be. We see tons of different types of subsidies. We're going to cover 5 different types of subsidies that you may see. Subsidies can be any form of support, and it doesn't necessarily have to be from the government. You can get subsidies from a school if you're getting a boost in grades for a reason. You can get subsidies from a church if you're getting assistance with something like living expenses or clothing or something like that. Or it can come from a government where they give you a food assistance program benefits, or they give you Medicare, medical insurance benefits because of your status as an earner. When we talk about the 5 types of subsidies, we're going to talk about production subsidies, consumer/consumption subsidies, export subsidies, employment subsidies, and tax subsidies. First type is production. It's basically a subsidy to increase the overall production by covering partial cost of production. So kind of twofold here is when we do that, we're trying to keep our prices kind of low to make sure that the market's a little more balanced. But what we will see is we'll see a subsidy basically that tells farmers to produce more and more and more. I've seen videos of farmers in New York and Wisconsin who milk cows dumping milk out because the market can't take the milk, but they get paid to produce the milk either way. So they overproduce and they overburden, and then they're very wasteful because there's no place for this milk to go. So a subsidy would be used to increase overall production by covering partial costs, and a great example would be milk. Cover part of the cost and encourage the farmers to do it. If farmers had to do it and sell milk at current prices, many farmers would not likely be in the business of farming milk, and we'd have to import our milk from someplace else, which would be less than ideal. We want to kind of keep some things in our own country. So that's where a production subsidy can come in. Right? We're going to, produce that. Another example would be for like battery or solar operated cars where you are not polluting as much. You might get a subsidy to produce those as a company. Consumer/consumption subsidies are subsidies that influence a consumer's behavior. Now, that could be many, many different things. But one thing that it can do in one area that has been used is for some basic necessities. This would be a great example of our food assistance programs, where we are kind of allowing people that cannot necessarily buy the food themselves to get a subsidy that kind of allows them to buy the food that they need. Another example would be power in rural areas. Right? It costs very much to get power out to some of those rural areas. But we also want to protect the consumer out in those rural areas by providing them the power at a lower cost. So it's really important that we kind of see what is going on with these consumer consumption subsidies to make sure that we're influencing the behavior and influencing it in the right way to make sure that we are allowing the people that need it most to do it. Things like water, electricity, maybe housing might be subsidized to make sure that people have these items. The next type of subsidy is an export subsidy. The export subsidy is paid to a firm to export goods. It lowers the cost of goods abroad, but keeps domestic prices higher. Now, a great example would be rice. Now, commercial rice manufacturing, commercial rice growing is not something that's done widespread in the United States. We don't produce a lot of rice in our country, but a country like Japan and Korea can both produce a tremendous amount of rice. But the government doesn't want to keep all that rice on hand. So what they'll do is they'll pay these firms to export it to the United States because it begins to build good trade relations. what will happen is the rice will be more expensive if it's not exported in the country that it's in, and the price will be lower in the United States, who buys the rice up from Japan or South Korea, maybe Vietnam or Laos or someplace that can grow a lot of rice very easily. So we start to kind of see that being an export style subsidy. These subsidies protect manufacturing interest in a country. China really took off when these subsidies started to kind of come in, and the government would provide these people with the opportunity to ship their goods abroad. And because of that, you started to see China grow into a massive manufacturing hub in our world. An employment subsidy is a subsidy paid to the firms that hire the workers or increase research and development. So basically what an employment subsidy says is hire these workers and we'll cover part of your wage. And that's exactly what happens, is if you hire a certain type of worker or you hire a worker, the government may cover part of the wage. And it's a way to get more people working, to have more of an honest income or to have a better income. But it's also a way to kind of encourage companies to hire more people so that employment goes down. We talked about ways that they can control that when we talk about our next couple. And subsidies, and employment subsidies in particular, are a great example of how the government can control the economy. The next type, or another good example would be, another great example would be veterans in the United States. Right? There's been a huge push to hire returning veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. And because of that, there are certain types of kind of tax breaks for companies that would hire a veteran to work in a job over a civilian to work in the job. And it's just kind of one of those ways that they really try to push that stuff. A tax subsidy is when a local government or municipality wants to create opportunity for the citizens of that area by luring a business or corporation to an area and then proceeding to allow them to have a tax break, allowing them to not have to pay taxes on the property or earnings or whatever it might be. Famously, Detroit has done this frequently. In fact, Michigan is one of the states that leads the nation in corporate subsidies to have corporations stay in the state. And it's part of the reason why Michigan's economy started to rebound a little bit, because all of a sudden, there's a tax break. It's lucrative to kind of do that. You don't have to pay. Example, Chrysler is in just a little north of Detroit, and they built this huge, giant world headquarters out there. And part of that world headquarters is that they don't pay taxes right now. They don't pay taxes to the county, and that's a huge break for this company that operates, because if they had to pay property tax, the property they're sitting on is quite high, quite valuable. And what they would have to do is pay quite a hefty tax to the local community. Now, these are criticized pretty heavily by people, because all of a sudden the community is getting less money but still has to provide the same services. But it's kind of this trickle-down idea in a way that what you'll see is you see people that are participating in the economy and working and have more money, and there's a lot of kind of small business growth, etc., because these people have jobs in the area. And with that, we've kind of covered all of what we're going to cover on this. We talked about how the United States, and more specifically governments in a mixed economy, will basically allow certain things to happen. It'll provide certain things that we can't exclude people from, and we may not be charging them from, and it doesn't diminish the quality of it over time as more people use it. And we talked about subsidies and ways that government tries to influence behaviors in the economy through those 5 different methods. We talked about tax policy and the 3 different ways that people are taxed and gave examples of those. And that's kind of what we talked about. So now there's a couple questions I'd like you guys to answer before you guys depart, and then we'll get that taken care of, and we'll see you next time. Again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Bye.